and that way we'll be able to follow along together. All right. Just out of curiosity, how many, before I share my screen, how many of you would say you're really familiar with the book of James? Like you maybe even have like a verse or two memorized and kind of have a good sense of what it's about. Anyone like that? It's okay if not. How many of you, this may have been your first time to read the book of James? Okay. All right. Great. Good. That's good. And I imagine the rest of us are somewhere in the middle or in between. And it could be you didn't have a chance to read it, and that's okay. I'll encourage you to try and do that this week. All right. I'm going to share my screen with you. And if you just jumped on, we put our first name and which campus we're on. If you're online campus from another church, just put O. Unmute if you want to read for me, and at different times I won't call on you, so just jump in if you want to do it. Let's just start off. Who is James? Somebody read James 1:1. It's there on the screen.
James, a servant of God, of the Lord Jesus Christ.
All right.
Sorry, whoever I barely beat.
Yeah, and we'll have lots of chances to read. So here's, his name is James. He's a servant of God and of the Lord Jesus Christ. And what's really fun about the scriptures is if you know much about the Bible, they're made up of letters, poetry, prophecy, sometimes history. And so we can put together kind of the history of what's happening pretty easily by just reading all these letters. And we know this is not James and John. There was a dynamic duo, the sons of Zebedee. Their nicknames were the sons of thunder, and they walked with Jesus. And they were two of the first fishermen that followed Jesus. We know this is not him because James of that combo, James and John, was arrested and killed by King Herod. In Acts chapter 12, we read about this. But what we discover is this is actually James, the half-brother of Jesus. So if you know the Christmas story, you know that Jesus, we believe, was born of a virgin, and she married a man named Joseph. She was betrothed at the time. And then Joseph and Mary went on to have children. And we discover that you can see here, there were at least four other brothers, James, Joseph, Simon, and Judas. And then in fact, Judas wrote another letter that's included in the Bible. And this is pretty remarkable because James and Judas were also included in the scriptures earlier in John 7:5. Someone read that out for us. Right there on the screen.
For even his own brothers did not believe in him.
Perfect. All right. So we're kind of first introduced to these boys as not believing in Jesus. Now, I want to give them a benefit of the doubt. Any of you grow up with a brother or sister that hung the moon to your parents?
That did
Any
what?
of you, any of you have a brother or sister that felt like they could do no wrong and you were always getting in trouble? Could you imagine growing up with Jesus as your brother, right? And we don't have a lot of stories about Jesus growing up, but we even know that, you know, when he stayed back at the temple at age 12, even then it was because he was obeying his father in heaven. Like he was kind of years ahead. His parents had walked off from Jerusalem and left him, didn't realize he was not among their caravan. They traveled back to get him. And Jesus had been amazing all of the teachers of the law with his wisdom. So here's two boys, at least we know, James and Judas, who grew up with a brother who his mother would talk about as, you know, if he was really, really special. And they were not intrigued by that. In fact, there were other times, this John 7:5 that Doug read is from a passage where they actually encouraged Jesus to get out of town, like leave us, you know, leave this place. And if you really are so special, go tell other people because we don't want to hear it, right? They were embarrassed by him. But eventually, James and Judas become followers of Jesus to the point where, as Tom read, he calls him the Lord, which means his leader, you know, his he sees them as the equivalent of God. He's the Messiah, the Christ. And so obviously he was able to see that Jesus was different than all of his other brothers. But I think what happens is James becomes by the way, the first pastor of the church in Jerusalem, which is the first church. Paul reports to him. Peter reports to him. They are big leaders in the church. In Acts 15, he is the leader of the Council of Jerusalem. There was this big debate among the Jews that were following Jesus, because all of a sudden Gentiles wanted to follow Jesus. And the Jews were saying, well, wait a minute, they haven't been circumcised. They aren't following the law. If you're not familiar with circumcision, don't Google it. Let me just tell you, it's a ritual that little 8-day-old boys would go through. And basically it was removing the foreskin. And so literally what their debate is the Jews were saying, we think anyone who's a Gentile has to first become circumcised and then they can follow Jesus. And they had a big debate about that. Fortunately, they landed on the side of, you know what? First, someone read here, Acts 15:19. This was James speaking, and this was the decision that he shared from the Jerusalem Council. Who's got that? Go ahead.
After that, he appeared to more than 500 of his
Oh, wait,
brothers.
sorry, Kenneth. I'll read the verse right above that one.
Okay. It is my judgment, therefore, that we should not make it difficult for the Gentiles who are turning to God.
Excellent. So Gentiles is simply a phrase used to describe anyone not Jewish. So basically, let's make it easy for everybody. And thank goodness they decided that, right? If you could imagine trying to convince someone to follow Jesus, and then they say yes, and then you have to tell them they need to be circumcised, right? Or you got to convince them to now go through the ancient rituals. So what happened? How did James go from not even believing that his brother was something special to now seeing him as the Messiah? All right, somebody that hasn't read yet, 1 Corinthians 15:6-8. Read that out for us. Here's what happened. Here's what we discover from the scriptures.
After that, he appeared to more than 500 of the brothers and sisters at the same time, and most of whom are still living, though some have fallen asleep. Then he appeared to James, then to all the apostles, and last to all, he appeared to me also, as to one abnormally born.
Perfect. So Paul is writing this, and he basically says there were eyewitnesses that saw after Jesus had been crucified and killed, he was alive. In fact, he appeared to more than 500 people at the same time. There was a crowd of 500 people that saw Jesus, and he was definitely dead. And this phrase, though some have fallen asleep, means you could go, basically he was saying, you can go talk to almost all 500 of these people. Now, some have died, but those who are living could tell you they saw Jesus. But he also appeared to his brother James. I think that's significant. James saw Jesus alive after he'd seen him killed. Now, James becomes a real significant leader in the church. Eventually, he is killed for his faith. He's a martyr. And he writes this letter, though, before he's killed. And in this letter, he's really challenging how followers of Jesus live. Now, if you've ever read the Bible and thought, goodness, this is really tough, or maybe you're not yet a believer and you've wondered why the Bible seems to be so tough sometimes, or you've had someone say to you, you know, the Bible just doesn't seem to relate to my life. You have to remember that what the Bible is trying to do. And in this case, this is a letter to believers. So a person who doesn't believe might read this and think, my goodness, this is too much. Well, the truth is, yeah, it's impossible to pull off without God's help. And so remember, this is a letter to believers, and he's actually taking the Sermon on the Mount, which is one of the greatest, it is the greatest sermon preached in history. It's Matthew 5-7. And in that, by the way, if you didn't know this, Gandhi took the Sermon on the Mount and used it and applied it in a social structure, which brought freedom for his people. Dr. King actually took Jesus' Sermon on the Mount and applied it in our country, which was the civil rights movement, this idea of turning the other cheek. Someone asks you go a mile, you go 2 miles. And so that sermon so resonated that James writes a whole letter trying to help us live this out. All right, I'm going to jump to, we're not going to be able to look at this. If you didn't have a chance to watch it, let me encourage you this week, and I'll email you the notes, by the way. Everything I'm showing you here, I'll email to you. And what I wanted to make sure you saw, though, is there's a great video on the book of James from the Bible Project. We'll be referencing them often. Really good stuff. And they kind of break down the context. So it's always good to watch one of their videos before you read a letter or read a book in the Bible, and it helps illuminate so much more what you're reading. A lot of times when you read the Bible and it doesn't make sense, there's probably something going on that's cultural. You know, think about this. The most recent parts of the Bible we read are 2,000 years old, right? Some of what we're reading is 3,500 years old. Wow. So just knowing the context, and by the way, the Old Testament was written when in many ways the people of Israel were being brought out of a world where everybody was like the ISIS and the Taliban. Right? And so literally it was my God will beat up your God. It was violent, and if you read the scriptures, it is not PG. I mean, it's PG-13 or even rated R. And so some people are just surprised by that. But it's a real book written by real people, inspired by God, because the book from beginning to end is the story of God's pursuit of humanity and revealing himself as the person of Jesus. All right, so let's get to James. We'll go much quicker than we did on just that verse 1. But we needed to get some context. Now I'm going to show you a little trick that I do. This helps me when I'm studying the Bible. This is the passage right here. Instead of it all highlighted in yellow, what I do is I highlight in green what I'm supposed to do. So kind of the call to the believer. And what's in purple is what God is going to do or who God is. And what's in red is what I'm supposed to avoid doing. Now, let me just say this, because I almost didn't share this with you because I don't want to give you the wrong impression that the scriptures are a big giant to-do list and don't do list. That's not what this is. The scriptures are actually a portal into God's presence. It's a living word of God. But it helps me kind of understand what I'm looking at when I think in terms of what's trying to be communicated here. And so let me just read a few little highlights here and show you kind of how on your own time you can start to pick up little themes, right? If you read through this whole thing, I'll just start reading in verse 2, and then I'll try to help you keep up with me as I skip along. But he starts off with, "Consider it pure joy, my brothers and sisters, whenever you face trials of many kind, because you know that the testing of your faith produces perseverance. Let perseverance finish its work so that you may be mature and complete, not lacking anything. If any of you lacks wisdom, you should ask God, who gives generously to all without finding fault, and it will be given to you." Now, notice a word that's already popped up twice, perseverance. You keep reading a little bit lower, you'll see down here, the word perseverance pops up again somewhere. Oh, sorry, further down here.
I think it was in 12 also.
Oh, was it? Okay, that's where it was. Sorry, there it is. Thank you. That was it. "Blessed is the one who perseveres under trial, having stood the test." So we see the people he's writing are under intense persecution, and they're struggling, and things are tough. And what he's trying to do is give them a sense of the ability to trust God. And he says, when you're tempted, verse 13, no one should say, "God is tempting me." For God cannot be tempted by evil, nor does he tempt anyone. But each person is tempted when they are dragged away by their own evil desire and enticed. Then after desire has conceived, it gives birth to sin, and sin, when it is full grown, gives birth to death. And so what you see here is James is trying to remind them, verse 17, every good and perfect gift is from above. So in our lives, 2,000 years later, in the year 2021, every good gift you have is from God. Every temptation you experience and the difficulties in life aren't necessarily, the temptations are not from God. God allows us to be tempted, and God allows difficult things to happen so that we might lean on him and trust him more. There's a kind of a very American churchianity idea. It's a big phrase. You can look it up if you want to, but it's called moralistic therapeutic deism. And what that phrase means is a lot of times American Christians, and some people call themselves Christians, but they aren't actually following Jesus. And if you ever need help figuring those folks out, they're usually the folks that aren't very loving, aren't very grace giving, right? But they're kind of aligned to a religion that's angry, right?
Yeah.
But what happens is what we can discover is what Jesus is inviting us into is very, very different. And so moralistic therapeutic deism is this a version of belief that if I do all the right things, then God will give me all that I need. But actually what we're invited into is a relationship where God is with us even when things are tough. All right. So I want to try something just to summarize this verse here. What we see, some of the purple, God gives wisdom. God gives all good gifts. God gives new life. What is our job? What do we need to do? Well, we need to ask in faith. We need to choose trust over anxiety. And we need to have a faith greater than our circumstances and learn to persevere. Okay, I'm gonna try something. And when can you guys still hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, I'm share in my screen. Let me make sure you guys can see. We're going to watch a little video, cartoon
Okay.
here, the Bible Project. If you can hear it, give me a thumbs up. Okay, if you cannot hear it, give me a thumbs down and we'll try something different. Okay, let's try it. Okay.
The story of the Bible begins with God creating a beautiful world and then sharing it with all of his creatures.
And he appoints Adam and Eve to rule it on his behalf.
And God gives them access to his wisdom and life, but then tells them that there's one tree they can't eat from because it will lead to death.
So they have a choice about how to rule with God. This kind of feels like a test.
Well, that's because it
Oh, my bad.
is a test.
But isn't that kind of cruel for God to test them?
Well, not all tests are bad. Let's say there's a king who chooses you to fulfill a royal task because he wants to know if you are trustworthy.
Well, I guess that's a test, but really it's an opportunity to do something important and noble.
Right. But then let's say there's a rebel who hates the king and you. And he tries to convince you that you would be better off not doing what the king asks.
Well, the rebel is setting a trap.
Right. So a test could be an opportunity or a trap. And the difference is whether the one testing you has your best interests in mind.
I see. And both types of tests appear in the beginning of the Bible. God tells them to eat of the tree of life and not the forbidden tree.
Yeah, this is God's test of loyalty. God wants to rule the world with humans as his partners, which means they will need to trust his wisdom over their own.
But then a rebel comes and tests them to eat of that other tree.
Right, the rebel seizes this opportunity and twists it, so he can lead the humans into exile and ultimately death.
He turns the test into a trap.
But after the humans fail, God promises that one day a human will come who will pass the test and defeat the snake. And as the story moves on, God gives a couple named Abraham and Sarah an opportunity to trust him by leaving their family behind, to go to a new land where God will use them to restore his blessing to all people.
So this is a test.
And at first, things go well. But Abraham quickly fails. He lies to protect himself, and then he and Sarah scheme to get a son their own way by abusing one of their servants.
Definitely not passing the test.
But God doesn't give up on Abraham. He gives him one final opportunity, a test to prove his loyalty. God asks Abraham to go up onto a hill and offer his son as a sacrifice.
I can't imagine a more intense test.
And Abraham does it. But in the last moment, God stops him and provides a substitute animal in the place of his son. God then says he will fulfill his promise through Abraham's family because he passed this test.
So Abraham passed this test, but he hasn't proven to be a fully trustworthy partner. We're still waiting for someone who can pass the ultimate test.
Yeah, and as the family of Abraham grows and becomes a nation, God continues to test them.
Like when the Israelites wander in the wilderness for 40 years.
They have lots of opportunities to trust in God, to provide water or daily bread.
But they instead blame God and even say that he trapped them in the desert to kill them.
And so the rest of Israel's story in the Hebrew scriptures is pretty much the same. The Israelites don't trust in God and his promise. They're not loyal, and eventually the whole nation fails.
So humans have an amazing opportunity to partner with God, but no one is really qualified.
And so all of this brings us forward to Jesus. There's a story where Jesus goes into the wilderness for 40 days and 40 nights without food or water.
Ah, yes, the wilderness. And there, he meets a sinister creature who tries to trap him.
But Jesus trusts in God's wisdom.
And he passes the test.
Then later there's a story about Jesus going to pray with some friends, and God commissions him to go up to Jerusalem and to give up his life.
And so he goes. And on the night of his arrest, Jesus took his friends and went to a garden.
And he told them to pray because tonight, he said, is the great test.
And he prayed to God, please let this test pass from me, but not my desire, rather may your desire be done.
In this garden, Jesus shows us what passing the test looks like. He trusted in God's wisdom, he loved others more than himself, and he confronted evil with good.
Even though it cost him his life.
Right. Jesus offered his own life as a sacrifice to cover for all of the failed tests of his people Israel and of all humanity. Jesus passed the ultimate test on behalf of us all.
This is amazing, but that doesn't mean everything is gonna be great in our lives. I mean, let's be honest, we're gonna face our own tests every day.
Right. Jesus said every generation of his followers would have their own tests that will force them to trust God in radical new ways.
And these tests can be difficult and often painful.
But remember, a test from a good God is an opportunity. This is why James, a leader in the early Jesus movement, said that we should be grateful when we face tests and trials because they offer us a gift. It's an opportunity to surrender to God's wisdom and to become more like Jesus, the one who loved us and who passed the test on our behalf.
All right. Whoops. So what stood out to you guys?
That will be tested.
Yeah. Give a good, anyone have a good summarizing statement of what they're trying to convey in that video?
I think, despite our propensity to keep messing up as we go through life, just like Israel had done as a people. God is always making a way to continue to come back, and his ultimate way and final and the only way back to him is through Jesus, who was able to go through and pass the test and pass the trials in life and do it in a manner that was glorifying to God.
It's good. It's good. Yeah. Did you like that little sounded like Desperado or Western hero? Yeah, that idea of if the person behind the test is for you. I love that idea, right? What we're going to do here in a moment is we'll break into groups, and certainly, you know, this year has been a test in many ways, and the hope is that, you know, as John Burke's been saying, we come out stronger than we went into this. You know, what are the ways, you know, you'll have a chance to share, you know, what are some of the ways that you've been able to grow from this? Like, what are some good things that God has brought from this? So let me share my screen again. Go back to our passage here. Great. So that's the Bible Project. And they do a really good job, I think, of giving context. So then there's the next section. Now, this is not as long, so I thought we just have someone who has good eyesight read this, because I found it difficult to read with the colors. I use like a pastel kind of pencil and I do this in my Bible. But someone want to read at least 19 through 24.
Excuse me, Eric,
Yeah.
your screen isn't on whatever you're trying to show us.
Oh, yeah. Thank you. Thank you for telling me that. Let me try again. Hold on. Stop share. Thank you. Thank you. My dog is getting so old, she barks at me as if I'm an intruder. All right, here we go. There we go. Thank you very much, Doug. That's what I meant.
Okay, there we go.
Perfect. Yeah, someone pick up with everyone should be and go through verse 24. Someone read that for us.
Everyone should be quick to listen, slow to speak, and slow to become angry, because
Oops, we lost you there. Sorry, we lost you there. Could someone else try? I think your connection's a little bad. Yeah, that's okay.
Sorry.
Someone else got it? Bennett, do you mind? Oh, go ahead. Go ahead. Yeah.
Everyone should be quick to listen, slow to speak, and slow to become angry, because human anger does not produce the righteousness that God desires. Therefore, get rid of all moral filth and the evil that is so prevalent, and humbly accept the word planted in you, which can save you. And go on. Do not merely listen to the word and so deceive yourselves. Do what it says. Anyone who listens to the word but does not do what it says is like someone who looks at his face in the mirror, and after looking at himself, goes away and immediately forgets what he looks like.
Good. Excellent. Thank you. Someone else pick up 25 and let's read through the end here.
But whoever looks intently into the perfect law that gives freedom.
You know what? I think you were breaking up there too. Yeah. I'm so sorry.
Oh,
Someone else want to try it?
But whoever looks in, oh, sorry.
Go ahead.
Okay, I'll go. But whoever looks intently into the perfect law that gives freedom and continues in it, not forgetting what they have heard, but doing it, they will be blessed in what they do. Those who consider themselves religious and yet do not keep a tight rein on their tongues deceive themselves, and their religion is worthless. Religion that God our Father accepts as pure and faultless is this: to look after orphans and widows in their distress and to keep oneself from being polluted by the world.
Perfect. Okay, perfect. Thank you so much. So what we see here, let me just ask you, what were some things that stood out there?
It's not what you say, it's what you do.
Okay, sure. What else?
I think just reading the word and just not like really putting it into practice. You're just thinking nice, reading nice things.
Yeah.
So, and deceiving yourself, really.
That's good. Yeah. So remember, he's writing to believers, and to the believer, the scriptures are a word from God. And so obeying God by obeying the scriptures is really critical. It's important. In the notes I'm going to send to you, my hope is it'll encourage you kind of understand the purpose of the Bible. It's better to think of the Bible as more like a love letter designed to connect us to the one who loves us and created us. The goal of the scriptures is transformation, not to get more information. The goal is to grow closer to know God and to become who he's created you to be. And that happens by hearing the word and doing the word. It's really about putting your faith in action, so to speak. My pastor in LA, his name was Erwin McManus, he used to say, the scriptures are a portal into God's presence. And I love that idea. And there are some tools. So what I'll send you includes some kind of clues on what to do when you're reading the scriptures, when you come across something that doesn't make sense. It's important to know to interpret the scriptures with the scriptures, to always have humility when interpreting and applying the scriptures, know what genre you're reading, and know the overarching story is really about God and humanity. In the first part, the Old Testament, the Hebrew scriptures, it's God and Israel. And the second part, it's God and the church. But you also see the story of God and individuals throughout. And from the beginning, you see creation, fall, redemption, and restoration. So the story is really of bringing heaven and earth back together, God and humanity back together. And so anyway, I'll send it to you. I think it'll be helpful. What I'm going to do is share with you guys 2 questions. There'll be about 3 or 4 people in your group. And I put you with some folks you might know. If not, they might be your neighbor. Let me put this in the chat. And you don't have to be an expert. You're really just sharing what you are needing wisdom for. And in what ways are you seeking to live differently? So it could be something that you heard tonight that you're trying to apply. It could be something that, it's a new year resolution and you're really working on. So my hope is you just take maybe 2 or 3 minutes each, and then I'll bring us all back in about 15, 20 minutes. All right. You guys up for this? I'll put open all rooms. You just click join, and then you'll meet up with a couple others. Ready? Here we go. And Ray, there you are. I need to assign you, Ray, to a room. Okay, there you go.
My speaker still being funny.
No, you sound good.
Sound good. Sound good.
So weird. Okay.
Hey guys, I'm actually just wanting to say hello.
Hi.
Hey
Hi.
there. I'm going to make sure there's a couple people missing rooms. So let me get them assigned, but just want to make sure you guys all made it.
Oh.
All right. See ya. Be good.
All right. I think if I know how to get out of here. How do I leave?